Hi everyone, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. One of the things I like to do is do street portraiture, and I know for some people they decry the whole idea of it because they go, that's not street photography. Street photography should be done surreptitiously. People shouldn't be aware of the camera when you make a photograph. But for me, street portraiture has always been a part of street photography, and I think the big reason is that both traditional street photography and street portraiture help me to deal with fear. Like you, I've often had trepidation about going out and shooting on the street because of fear of how people are going to react. And I find that the practice of street photography really is a great opportunity for me to move past my fear. I feel like if I can do that on the street, I shouldn't let fear deter me from doing anything else. So anytime I go out into the street to make photographs, it's an opportunity for me to practice that, to get past my fear and to create something beautiful, hopefully. And I think street portraiture can be a big part of that because it really calls on you to really confront your fear, to actually go up to a complete stranger and say, hey, there's something that I find interesting about you, and I'd like to make a photograph of you. I think it takes a extra level of courage to be able to go up to a complete stranger and start talking to them about making a photograph of them as compared to just trying to do it and not create any awareness that you've captured the photograph. And I think there's a place for both if you make the street the place where you make your photographs. And I think it's also important to, as well as, learning to contend with your fear, is to remain conscious of how to make a good photograph. So we chose 3 pictures to help discuss that point. Okay, here we have a shot by Debby K. Wong. We have no XF data here. Now, one of the things about approaching someone to make their photograph is it gives rise to a lot of nervousness. At least it does for me. And one of the things that I do to try and remedy that is I start thinking about, okay, how am I going to make this a good photograph? And I already, even before I've approached the person, I'm considering the light and the background. Because more often than not, the place where I find the subject is not the place where I want to make the photograph, for a variety of reasons, but mostly because the light is bad or the background isn't particularly interesting. So as I'm approaching someone, I'm always thinking about where am I going to put them if the situation in which they're in really doesn't serve the photograph. And once I ask them, can I make your photograph? I'll usually ask them, well, will you move over here? The light's better. And usually people are very responsive. If they've said yes to a photograph, they are more than likely going to be glad to move in order to get the most flattering photograph possible. Unless they're a street performer and they're in the midst of doing something, most people that I ask don't hesitate at all to move into a nice position in order for me to create a pleasing photograph. So here we're taking a picture by Debby K. Wong, and the light on this woman is wonderful. It seems to be an overcast day, so we're not dealing with really harsh light. I assume that she's a street vendor or something like that. And so she's out on the street. It looks to be a relatively busy street. You can see a motorcycle or a bicycle on the far right-hand side of the frame. You see the street scene with the receding roadway leading off into the distance. So this is a relatively busy street. And then you have this beautiful woman with her beautiful face just being fully engaged with the photographer, which is wonderful. But the choices that were made here are the same kinds of choices that you have to make when you're making your straight street photography, right? What's the quality of the light? And then what's happening with your background? In this case, Debby chose a wide aperture to help create a very shallow depth of field, to emphasize the woman's face, and to throw everything else out of focus, which is a real valid way to go. But you have to be conscious of what you're going to do going in. So for me, if I saw this scene and I did want to minimize the background, I would already be changing my aperture and being very conscious of my shutter speed, make sure I have a fast enough shutter speed and a high enough ISO. All those technical considerations are playing into my choices as I'm moving into the scene. So I'm already thinking about light, I'm thinking about my background, I'm thinking about my camera settings. So by the time I get up to the person and I ask them, can I make your photograph? All of those decisions have been made, and all I have to do is either photograph them where I found them or ask them to move so I can get a better overall light and background for my subject. And because you've made all those choices, you can be fully engaged with your subject, and you don't focus so much on your camera as you're focusing on the person. The quality of the light here, the shallow depth of field, the way her face is framed by her hat, really serve the shot here. And it's those little details that you want to be paying attention to. If you're too caught up in your own fear, your own anxiety, you're going to be more focused on getting the moment over with. And you'll only realize later that you messed up the shot because you weren't paying attention to all those things that I'm talking about. Debby here obviously didn't have that problem. She was able to focus technically and completely engage with her subject in this moment, and it produces a really wonderful photograph. Here we have a shot by Andy Farmer. This was shot with a Fujifilm X-T1 at 550th of a second at f2, ISO 200. So here Andy is at a park, and he identifies his subject as an artist in the park. And take a look at the scene. It's very similar to the other scene where we're dealing with some overcast light. There seems to be some sunlight that's breaking through, but in the location where the subject here is, the light is fairly diffused. So we're not dealing with the harsh shadow beneath the brim of the hat that we would typically encounter on a bright, sunny day. This scene is a park, so like the street scene before, it's fairly busy. So Andy here makes a similar choice with respect to the depth of field. It's not as shallow depth of field as the previous shot, which may have to do with the focal length that was chosen as well as the aperture. But what I like about this shot, as well as just the quality of the light, is that we still get a sense that this is a park. There's enough depth of field to give us details of the surroundings, of the other people there, but not to the point that they're a distraction. So again, the choice of depth of field is a big choice when you're trying to decide how you want to render your subject relative to your background. The quality of the light, guys, is always really, really key. So when you're approaching someone, always take a look at the light. If the light is crappy, don't hesitate to move your subject. Because the shot, regardless of what Photoshop magic you try to use, if the light is crap, the photograph is going to be crap. So if you find a subject in this ideal light, then there's not much more that you have to do. All you have to do is think about, okay, what's going to be in my background, and then figure out your overall framing and how you want to balance the relationship between the subject and the surrounding background. As well as the light and this guy's expression and his look, I love the gesture of the hands. He may have been a little nervous about being photographed, so sometimes people will kind of fidget with their hands, but in this case, it provides a really nice gesture. And I like the fact that the guy's expression seems so genuine. A lot of times people will give you their face. They give you the face when they're going to be photographed typically. And it's the challenge for you as a photographer is not to rush it, is to somehow be really engaged with the person so that they relax just enough to give you some genuineness in their personality and their expression and their presence in front of the camera. And one of the ways to do that is to take more than one shot. Don't just make one photograph and move on. Make several photographs. You can sometimes feel rushed because you don't want to take too much of this person's time, but push it. Just when you think you want to stop, push it a little more and make a couple of more frames. Because what I found is that people expect you to only make one shot, and then when you make several, at some point they go, is this guy going to keep going? And at some point, whatever face they've put on will disappear. And I usually find that when I say, okay, we're good, I still keep shooting. Because at that point, the people will tend to just relax, and in that millisecond, I can often find my shot. I'm looking for the moment where they let their guard down. And that's why it's so important to be engaged and to take a lot of photographs, but it's creating that balance between being fully engaged with the person, but being very conscious of what you're doing with the camera. And it only takes one frame, folks, just one. You can take a dozen or 24 pictures of a person, but you only need one to walk away satisfied. Okay, here we have a shot by Bryon Segraves. This was shot with a Leica Q at 1,000th of a second, 1.8 at ISO 100. Now, this is a shot that you can only get by getting up and close. I don't know if Bryon went up to this guy and just asked, "Can I make your photograph?" or whether or not he just used body language as he moved up and started making the photograph. This is the kind of shot where you really have to move past your fear, where you have to call on your bravery to just go in there, because with a 28mm, the only way you're going to make this a good shot is by getting in nice and tight. And I can't tell you how many scenes that I've seen where I just go, man, this will make a good photograph. But I know that the only way that it will be a good photograph is by me getting up close and personal. And Bryon does that in this shot. And here we're dealing again with a shallow depth of field to minimize the details in the background, this beach scene, but you still get a sense of place, right? And you can see how this shot just plays really well. The light color of the sand, the sky, really stands in stark relief to the darkness of his skin and his hair, and all the other tones are sort of like gray to light gray, and his skin and his hair deal with extreme the darker tones, and it's just beautiful. And the gesture of his hand on his belly and his expression, the spray of water, all of that stuff comes together. And some people might have seen this scene and photographed it from a distance, and it would not have the same feel. There's something about the fact that you are in close proximity, probably within touching distance, that makes this shot work as well as it does. If I have any quibble, it's that area of darkness here on the far right hand corner. There seems to be a pillar and maybe ice chest or something from a bike rack. When you're going in, it's really important to scan the edges of your frame, especially when you're making a portrait. And that's something I kind of drum on over and over again on the channel. But when you're going in, that nervousness is still going to be there. Even when the person has said yes, that nervousness about not wanting to overstay your welcome and trying to pull off a good shot is still present. But it's even more impetus for you to scan every millimeter of your frame when you're making the shot, because you don't want distracting elements in the frame. And sometimes you'll see it, and all you have to do is make a slight shift, oftentimes a micro shift in terms of framing, to get rid of it. It's not a big thing here. It doesn't ruin the shot for me, but I just want to say that because I think it's important to be conscious of that, because in some situations you can't eliminate it, because if you shift your frame, you introduce something that's a bigger distraction or that ruins the overall flow of the frame. I get that, but at least be conscious of it. Know that it's there and make the conscious choice to either include it or exclude it from your frame. All right, I hope that was helpful to you. It's a good reminder for me that street photography, whether it's straight street photography or street portraiture, is about getting past your fear. And I think doing street portraiture is a great way of being able to get past your fear if you feel that kind of anxiety anytime you go out and do a street photograph. It sounds kind of antithetical that going up to someone can reduce your fear when you're doing candid work, but you find that by going up to people, you realize that most people are very agreeable. And as long as you explain what you're doing and what it is about them that you find interesting, most people are more than pleased to pose for your camera. And I think you'll find how you'll help to develop that awareness of how freeing street photography can really be. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you've not heard of the Candid Frame before and you just discovered it by doing a search on the YouTube channel, the Candid Frame is a podcast which features conversations with some of the world's best photographers. We do it every week. Our most recent interview was with Matt Klaskowski, who you may know formerly as one of the Photoshop guys at Kilby Media. He's an educator, a great landscape photographer. And I finally got a chance to sit down with him after years of knowing him, and we had a really great and really interesting conversation that you shouldn't miss out on. If you think you know Matt, take a listen to this interview. I think you'll find some really surprising insights into this guy. A really wonderful man, and I'm so glad I had a chance to sit down and talk with him. And if you want to submit images to the Candid Frame Flickr poll, all you need to do is go to your computer, do a search on the Candid Frame, and ask to be added, and I'll be glad to do so. Try not to do this on your tablet or your phone. It seems to be problematic when you try to add yourself to the group. You get this notification that it's private only and blah, blah, blah. Just go to your computer and try to add it yourself. I get to it usually once a week, so if I'm a little delayed, it's just because I don't do this every day. I'll usually get to the list, the queue, once a week and add everybody, and then you can submit images to our community here. And we're almost at 3,000 members, which is really, really exciting. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.